On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Jonathan Villa. He is the practice director of cloud security at GuidePoint Security. We're going to be talking about building a cloud security team. And I think a lot of times, people don't have the expertise. They do bring in consulting companies to help. And at some point, either if you have those consulting companies in or you actually have the internal expertise, at some point you have to upskill, you have to help build out this team. And there's a lot of things that have to go into this, especially in the cloud security space. And Jonathan is here to talk to us about that. Jonathan, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Excited.
Awesome. So let's talk about two things before we start. One, tell everyone what GuidePoint does, and then you are the practice director of cloud security. What are some of those responsibilities?
Absolutely. So GuidePoint, we are, I would just kind of refer to us as a pure play cyber and information security organization. We do a lot of professional services in the cyber and information security space, in application security, cloud security, of course, GRC, penetration testing. But we're also a value-added reseller, right? So that's where we partner with a lot of organizations, kind of focusing on a lot of the current and even folks, companies that have been around for a while. We've been working with a lot of the technologies in the security space for quite some time. So what do I do in the cloud security practice? So I have the exciting challenge of staying on par with the course or ahead of the curve in terms of what's happening in the cybersecurity space with respect to cloud. Leading a team that delivers engagements around architecture, security architecture design, reviews, assessments, implementation, and program development. So I'll probably touch a little bit on that since we're going to talk about upskilling, right? What that cloud security program development is. So, that's it at a high level.
There you go. Awesome. Yeah, I'm excited. Security is hard enough. Cloud security incorporates a whole different level of complexity, obviously. Platform-specific issues, multiple, platforms. There's a lot here. And I guess just as a jumping off point, you guys do security consulting. And I guess the hardest problem sometimes is identifying the problem, right? Knowing when you need someone to step in and help in what part of cloud security. From what you've seen, what are some of those, reasons of, hey, I got to address cloud security. Obviously, everyone has to address cloud security. So let's actually, that's not the problem. But there are nuances to how security and cloud security integrate. And if you're building out that platform or you're building out a product and you need to mature and stabilize the security component, you have to know what you're looking for.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of times when we engage a client, the problem that's been identified is that what I refer to as the business, right? Like just the normal folks that are either helping the migration to the cloud or innovating and developing new applications, depending on the type of client. We typically step in when security has realized that they're moving very fast, right? And since we kind of talked about upskilling here, right? Traditionally here now in the cloud space. It's been a little bit of an uphill climb, right, for a lot of organizations that have very talented security professionals, but understanding how things work in the cloud is really kind of where some of those challenges have been. And I think that's also been a recurring theme, all right, for the last 5, 7, 10 years, right, in terms of cloud security. But a lot of times it's, how does an organization approach the problem and ensure that they are safeguarding the organization without impeding innovation, right? And slowing folks down, which again, kind of been a recurring problem, but a lot of times that's when that problem's been identified.
Yeah, it's interesting because, just when you're mentioning, the problem being identified, when you, I guess you look at security, everyone assumes that it's a problem. And I guess when you're talking about cloud security, and as you might be in different phases, if you're a mature company, you're a startup, everyone seemingly runs into these similar problems. And when we're talking about upskilling and you're talking about learning how to do this, you might need to bring somebody in, right, from the outside to help you figure out how these pieces fit together, solve the high level problem. But everyone always wants the consulting company to leave at some point. Can't really keep them on forever. It's expensive, right? Some point they have to leave, and then they have to deal with taking on some of those things, being their own core competencies in that. And since you've seen this happen, that handoff of, hey, the consulting companies come in, they've done their part, they've helped you solve your problem. What happens when the consulting company leaves?
It's a great question. Again, haven't been around the space for quite some time. I think I would say I've gone full circle with some organizations where, we come in and whether this has been at my time at GuidePoint or before, right? I've kind of experienced the same thing here where, I'm working with a client or an organization, the problem solved, but the understanding of how to keep that ship afloat, right, is not there, right? So you kind of come back around in 6 months or a year and you're like, oh, you're back to the original problem, right? So I think educating your team on, I like to, look at patterns a lot, right? And really that's where I think the education needs to happen for your existing personnel. It's not in how does network security work in the cloud, right? But it's more about the pattern of network security, right? And that's what's evolving very quickly in cloud, right? Now a couple of years ago, we're talking about hub and spoke. Now you have things in AWS like Transit Gateway, which kind of made that easier for a lot of organizations. So I think the leave behind should really be the education on identifying patterns in the cloud, so that those individuals know how to make, future decisions, but also keep following those patterns, right? Making sure that the wheels don't fall off, I guess. So
that is, the leave behind and follow patterns. That's actually, I think, a good way of putting it. I think, if I was thinking through this, and I'm like, and we have it, right? In your own home, you have the situation, somebody comes in, does some work, and then you think you gotta, the next time it happens, I'm going to take care of it. My wife is always like, do not try to touch plumbing, electricity. Just because you saw somebody do it does not mean you could do it. You're going to make a mess of it. And she's right. And part of it is, I don't have the ability. I don't have the competency. I don't have that understanding. Somebody hasn't upskilled me just watching. I haven't transferred through osmosis the recognition of what I need to do. But so you leave, and really the core of the podcast episode is around this concept of the team and upskilling and the knowledge transfer, and obviously being cloud security being so new, and resources being so tight. Like, it's not like you can go hire a cloud security expert at will. Like, it's not a position that there's abundance of people that are experts at this. There are a lot, but there's a definitely gap.
Right.
So when you talk to these companies and they are trying to go, okay, well, we need somebody to follow the patterns, what are some strategies that people try to put in place? Because I think that's useful for someone who's either thinking about cloud security, they're in the middle of it, or maybe they're somewhere in between.
It's a great question. So when I talk about patterns, right, I guess I could probably unpack that for a bit, but I look at cloud as an API driven infrastructure, right? And I've been using that term for a very long time, and and a lot of folks do as well. And I think having an understanding that that's what cloud or cloud computing is that it's an API driven infrastructure. The reason I say that you kind of really have to identify patterns is because oftentimes if people maybe don't really see is that you could solve a problem in the cloud with technology, right? Like, remember, security is people, process, and technology, right? And organizations will go and I say kind of just throw money at the problem, right? Like, we're going to buy a tool, right? And we're going to put it in. What that doesn't solve is the core, right? The root of the problem. All it does is bring you visibility in terms of like, hey, we have this problem, and now I know we have this problem everywhere instead of just here. But when I talk about, patterns and that point you made, right, of getting a subject matter expert, finding somebody to work with, whether it's within your organization, right, or an outside firm, that's able to look at the problem and say, you know what, it's an API driven infrastructure, right? Meaning we can take full control of what's happening in the cloud, right? We can put in preventative security, right, through policies or through some sort of infrastructure as code scanning, right, or through probably a couple different ways to ensure that those misconfigurations, I guess, to put it real simple, right, those misconfigurations don't come to life. And when you find somebody who's able to solve the problem that way, I think that's what separates a kind of cloud security subject matter expert, in my opinion, from just somebody who knows how to turn the knobs and things like that, right? So I think when you're looking to upskill your folks or you bring in a third-party company, that should be a big lead behind is the training in terms of how to approach the problem differently, right? Than just installing a firewall, for example, right? It's not as easy as it used to be, right, in the data center, I'll say.
Well, everything's now engineering, right? Like, I mean, I like the line cloud is an API driven infrastructure. I like to speak about everything has become engineering. Like there is no more, I mean, there are tools,
right?
But the majority of work being done is an API. You need some understanding of code. Security teams are still catching up. It's there's a mix of tools, and some people are getting into the software side. The whole shift left, which we won't even touch on this episode, but there is an upskilling happening. The cloud security components kind of catching up. And I guess as you're working with companies and they have to go through, they have to take the hand off, they have to take the baton from you guys. And obviously they have talented individuals, either people currently in security, that other people in other functions. This gap needs to be filled by somebody, even if it's not a net new outside hire. Are there typical profiles that suit someone to move into cloud security if someone doesn't have specific people to actually take over?
So that's a great question, and I try see if I can eliminate my bias out of that response. Right? I always, when you talk about looking at specific skills, I mean, I tend to lean more towards people who have some sort of development background, and it doesn't mean that they were an application developer, right? It's just that they understand that we could solve this problem with maybe a little bit of a customized solution, right? Complementing maybe a third-party product, right? And that goes back to the API-driven piece. It's not just that public cloud is API-driven. Almost, every vendor that we're working with, right, has an API, right? So their third-party tool that interfaces with the public cloud's API, but then they've also given us an API to work with, right? So when you look for an individual to really help kind of build out your program, sometimes. Again, maybe it's my bias because I have an application development background, but I tend to lean more towards people who say, we may be able to solve this using this API-driven infrastructure, right? Like one way or another. So yeah, I think to me that's a big piece. Now that doesn't say that folks who've never been involved in development wouldn't be able to be successful, right? That would be wrong because I've met some very talented individuals who have been completely away from development, but they understand like I said before, the pattern, right? They understand. They may not know how to implement, a particular solution, but they could conceive it, and they could help bring in folks from other parts of the organization to help, build out those solutions or find the right, solution for it. So I think it's, when you're looking for the right person, I think, somebody who just thinks pretty broad, right? Because cloud is broad, right? I mean, there's so many. It's not just a new technology. It's like the data center rebuilt, right? Every component, everything that's happening in the cloud or that happened in data centers happening in one environment now. And I think that, a broad thinker, I guess, is what I would say.
That makes sense. I guess, something that, I was listening to you talk about that, and you mentioned broad thinker, and it made me kind of, think about, you mentioned somebody from somebody with an application maybe side. And it seems like this might be, again, I could be wrong, correct me, but it seems like you need somebody who has broad experience, right? If you're going to talk about cloud security, you do need some experience touching different things, seeing, you mentioned this is wide, right? So seeing different things, touching different things, having that broader experience, it sounds like it might help. But also knowing that, security has a talent shortage, and then cloud security is even a deeper shortage because it's very nuanced and new. Does that kind of make it harder for someone, I guess, earlier stage career to jump into cloud security because they have to touch a lot of different things? Or is it something where you're like, what? It is so new that you can actually jump in and be an expert in, maybe one very, tiny component of it, and that's the way you go?
That's actually a really great question. I talk to a lot of, whether they're my former, colleagues or just, younger adults that want to, quote unquote, get into cloud security. I would say the answer is yes to both both points there, right? So, because I have found myself telling many people, the latter part that you talked about is cloud is still relatively new, right? Now is the time. I remember years ago, I've been working with AWS as a platform since, like, I don't even remember the year, but well before like 2010, right? Like I was very curious and I jumped in very early. And there was a period of time where I would tell my colleagues, I'd say, listen, at this point in time, if you just learn for the next 6 months, if you just ingested Azure or just ingested Google or AWS, like, you will get into this space, right? Into this field, because there weren't many experienced professionals, right? So I think for some people, this is a great time to kind of specialize in something and get in. At the same time, the first part of what you said, right, is also true, right? Because if I'm a hiring manager at a company and I need to just grow my team, that latter group, that's probably where your in is, But if I'm, maybe not a hiring manager, but if I'm a director, right, or a VP level at an organization or a CISO, I can't use that person, right? Then I need the person that is like, what is it, a mile wide and an inch deep, right? Like somebody who could speak to governance and, again, application security, network security, and compliance, and all those different things in the cloud. And that's really where your consultants are coming in, right? Because they have that, right? They're seeing, project to project, client to client, vertical to vertical. So on the consulting side, that's really what I would be looking for, somebody who has that broad experience. But again, to kind of just repeat myself here, if I was a hiring manager and I just needed to hire more talent, I would have no reservations on hiring, I guess what we would call junior level folks, right? I've done that on my team. I actually have some really interesting stories of folks that I've hired with pretty much no experience when I hired them. And one of the guys, unfortunate for me, but fortunate for him, he moved on, right? But I brought him on. He was in med school and had 5 Amazon certifications with no experience. But I love that, right? This was about 4 years ago. And I hired him. And beginning of last year, he left and went to go work for AWS. And I said, unfortunate for me, but fortunate for him, right? But so I guess what I'm saying here is that idea of hiring people that are just getting into the space, into this field, I really wouldn't have reservations in doing that if you have the right training program, right? If you have the right mentorship program to build those people up.
Yeah, and I think that's great. And I think, I think as you mentioned, if you look at something and you look at the technology and how old or how new it is, and you judge it based on the years of experience someone has in that, I think things change. We get a lot of, companies are like, well, we need a deep expertise in X. Well, it's only been around for 6 years. So if somebody has 2 years of it, they're a senior. Whether they have, how much overall work experience they have, that's different. But if you need expertise in this particular skill, there's a limit. And I think to your point, I think that's why I actually think it's a great time if you want to specialize on a platform and dive deep down the rabbit hole of the security side of that platform. You're going to be still early. It's still early. So I think I like how you kind of use that example of the med school student who now is at AWS. That's great.
Yeah, and I think he's probably making more money than me over there now. So really worked out for him. So
there you go. He owes you a bottle of something you like there. Last question I was going to ask you in terms of this, what we were talking about, the upskilling. When you're looking at training, right? Where can you? Is this something? This is for me to actually understand. Is this something that I could literally just go if I wanted to do the AWS certs? Because you mentioned this guy who did. Obviously, he's sharp. He's in med school. But can I just literally go on AWS, just start watching the videos and actually end up understanding, or do I need to actually go sign up for classes, or what does that look like for someone who does want to get into cloud security specifically? How do you actually do that?
So another great question. So I won't give this person's title because I think it'll give away who it is, right? And I was just a story yesterday. So a long time ago. I'm from Milwaukee. I worked in Chicago, right? Forever. I took the train every day. And one day I'm walking to the train, and this guy that I knew at the client that I was at, we just met and we started walking to the train, and he asked me, he goes, how do I get involved with AWS? Like, how do I learn AWS? And he was a Linux admin, right, for a kind of well-known services company. And I just said to him, look, nothing's going to beat hands-on experience, right? Just go to AWS. He already had some skill, right? So go to AWS, use their free tier, 12 months, as long as you kind of keep it minimal, you'll be able to use it for free. That was in the spring of a particular year. And in the fall of that year, he comes to my desk and says, hey, man, it was a pleasure knowing you. I'm leaving. I said, well, where are you going? So I'm going to AWS. I'm like, that's cool. We start off as like a TAM, right? A technical account manager. The reason I don't want to give his title is because anybody listening could probably find him on LinkedIn. I'll just say this, is that his title now is Global Head XYZ, right? And I mean, he was a smart individual, right? I don't want to take anything from him, right? But the opportunity to again get into this space is really at your disposal, right? It's the amount of information out there, whether they're Udemy courses, YouTube, all the reInvent sessions, so much Microsoft Cloud, information out there, Google. It's really at your disposal. And then a lot of these public cloud, all the three major cloud service providers give you like a free tier usage, So I always tell people, kick the tires, right? Think about when you were learning to drive, right? You had a little bit of textbook, but then it was on the road, on the road lessons. So my advice to anybody who's trying to get into the space is to kick the tires, take it for a drive, and and good luck. And hopefully, because there's a lot of need, but hopefully they'll find something. But that would be my advice.
Awesome, man. I think that is great advice, and I think if somebody does want to, build out a team or wants to get into it, I think these are some good pointers. So thank you for being on and sharing with everyone. I like to ask every guest this question. I was going to ask you as well. If you could ask a future guest on the show to cover a topic, what topic would you like to hear them cover?
The use of AI, right? In the use of public AI, right? So ChatGPT right now is hot, right? And there's a lot of conversations going on about that, about, hey, is it good for the workplace in terms of, if I'm a CISO, should I be concerned about my employees using ChatGPT who may be potentially, providing it proprietary information, right? We're just having this discussion today because I'm like, any system that's learning has to retain information, right? So it can continue to learn. So a question that I would be curious to hear other people, just what their opinion is, right, is on what potentially could be the future use of publicly accessible AI platforms. In terms of, are there any concerns about, data leakage or anything like that? So I'd be curious because I know it's been a topic amongst myself and some people, right? Right now I've been using ChatGPT to answer my 5-year-old's questions, right? Like, how long would it take you to swim to the bottom of the ocean? So that's been my use thus far. But yeah, I would love to hear other people's perspectives on that.
Awesome. I like that. That's actually a good one. That's actually might be a good roundtable discussion because I think there's a whole host of privacy concerns that we haven't even begun to touch on. Jonathan, what's a good way if somebody wants to reach out to you? You talked a lot about cloud security. If somebody wants to just pick your brain, just follow up with you on anything you've mentioned. What is a good way of getting a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. So one, my name, Jonathan.via@GuidePointSecurity.com, or marketing, may slap my hand for saying that I am also JV@GPSec.com, just our shortened domain there, but easier to remember. Or obviously on LinkedIn, right? Jonathan Villa on LinkedIn. I think my profile kind of looks like how I look today, so I think it'll be fine. But yeah, that's probably the best way to get a hold of me.
Cool. Awesome. Hey, thanks for being on. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for your time.
Absolutely. Thanks, Amir.
Awesome. That's it for this episode. We'll be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I'd love to put a roundtable together about concerns over public API usage of public AI usage of ChatGPT. I think there's a lot of intertwining things there. Reach out to me. I'd love to have you on. And if you found the podcast useful, you found it interesting, please share it with somebody else that could find it useful. Also, give it a review wherever you're listening to this. That's how it's been growing organically. So I thank everyone who does that. Till next time, thank you and goodbye.